A warm welcome, and thank you for joining the Winning Paths podcast family. We'd like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude for your support and enthusiasm. Your subscription means the world to us, and we're thrilled to have you on this archery journey. At Winning Paths, part of TIFAM, the Irish Field Archery Monthly, we're not just an audio channel, we're a community of passionate archery enthusiasts, united by our love for this ancient and captivating sport. Whether you're a seasoned archer or just starting out, our podcast is here for you. Dive into archery's rich history with our insightful monologues, exploring fascinating moments from ancient archers to modern-day legends, lore, and myths. Our interviews feature key figures in the archery world, sharing their experiences, insights, and advice. Our hosts also aren't afraid to voice bold and sometimes thought-provoking opinions, sparking lively discussions within our community. If you're enjoying the Winning Paths podcast, be sure to subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, share it with fellow archery enthusiasts, and together we can create a vibrant hub for everything archery, a place where passion meets knowledge and every arrow finds its mark. Thank you once again for being a part of the Winning Paths family. Your support fuels our passion, and we're excited to keep bringing you engaging content that resonates with the archery community. Subscribe on Spotify, follow us on YouTube, and let's continue shooting for the stars together. As the world sinks into the fading hours of autumn, Halloween casts a haunting shroud over all that was once familiar. The art of archery, honed through centuries of silent patience and deadly precision, seems to take on a spectral form, its sharp whistle through the air echoing like ghostly whispers of vengeance and long-buried oaths. These arrows, both relic and harbinger, traverse not merely physical space but plunge into the very chasms of the past, stirring memories soaked in ancient blood and binding curses. This season of eerie reverie, then, invites us to a darker contemplation, an exploration into the forsaken legends of spectral archers, cursed bows, and haunted competitions, each story a jagged incision into the fabric of history, reminding us that in archery, one may aim for victory, but invite damnation instead. The ghostly archer of Chillingham Castle, as we gaze upon a lonely place amidst the great waters, a mysterious spot plunged into the eternal dregs of the neither here nor lost British Isles, we encounter a tale steeped in mist and sorrow, a story that has marinated in the damp stones of Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, one of Britain's most accursed places, where walls groan under the weight of unsettled souls. Here lurks the shadow of a nameless archer, a retainer whose hands once drew arrows with an accuracy that could humble the greatest bowman of his time. In life, he was loyal to his lord, a figure known for his unparalleled skill in both war and hunt, until the night his fate took a darker, more insidious path. The records, yellowed and fraying at the edges, whisper that it was in the chill of the 13th century when this archer vanished, swallowed by the night as if by the ravenous earth itself. They searched, of course, men with torches, dogs sniffing through the frost-crusted undergrowth, but neither his body nor his bow was ever found, leaving only the castle's eternal silence in their wake. And yet, soon after, his form returned, a spectral silhouette pacing the battlements, bow drawn, gaze fixed on an invisible prey. His eyes, they say, are vacant, hollow, yet filled with an unending resolve, a grim fixation that pierces the air with an unseen ancient wound. Most chillingly, each Halloween, when the night sky is thick with whispers of the dead, the shadow of this archer stirs, taking aim at any wanderer who dares intrude upon his hallowed ground at the stroke of midnight. Those who've seen him swear, an arrow appears at their feet, sharp as despair, carved with an antiquated craft. They stumble back, unnerved by the sight, by the terrible, precise nature of the apparition. And yet, it is said that if one does not flee, they become a mark in his ceaseless hunt, a figure in his eternal aim. The shadow draws his bowstring tighter, a movement brimming with unearthly rage, a rage bound, so they say, by the twisted cords of betrayal and jealousy, by a lover who could not endure the archer's loyalty to another. The huntsman's last duel. The legend of the phantom huntsman rises like smoke from the ancient forests of medieval Europe. The huntsman was once revered, his arrows swift and true, his hand blessed with a precision envied by all. Pride, however, has a way of twisting skill into folly, and in his arrogance the huntsman dared the spirits to best him in skill, thinking himself untouchable. He strode into a forest thick with legends, a place of forgotten gods and forsaken promises, there to test himself against the darkness. In the heart of the woods, the huntsman met a figure woven from shadows, eyes glinting like embers in the night. They engaged in a strange, infernal duel, each aiming at impossible targets, a hare darting unseen through tangled roots, a sparrow flitting from darkness to darkness. The huntsman, heart racing, took aim at a phantom stag, a creature of bone and breath, glistening as if caught between life and death. With hubris guiding his hand, he released the arrow, yet it did not soar, nor even fall. Instead, it vanished, along with his life's breath, leaving him bound to the forest as a silent spectre, condemned to hunt shadows for eternity. Those who wander his woods speak of a glint in the dark, or the faintest sound of a drawn bowstring, a harbinger that they too may lose their way, fated to join the huntsman in his endless spectral pursuit. The haunting of Ypres. Among the horrors of war lies the tale of Arthur Mackay, a soldier drawn to the bow as both weapon and talisman, whose life was claimed by a spectral arrow during the infernal battlegrounds of World War I. As rumours have it, Mackay had unearthed a peculiar arrow from a forgotten field of old conflicts, a relic marked with ancient runes, a twisted memento from a blood-soaked era. Foolishly, he carried it with him to Ypres, thinking it might lend him fortune in the face of death. In the heat of battle, besieged and desperate, Mackay loosed the arrow in a final, fevered attempt. But this was no ordinary flight. The arrow did not fall to the earth, but soared, hanging as if possessed, arcing wildly into the night. Those who found Mackay the next morning swore they had never seen such terror, the man's face frozen, wide-eyed, as if his very soul had been plucked from him. In the days that followed, the men spoke of strange dreams, visions of ancient warriors, and the clashing sounds of swords haunting their nights. The cursed arrow, they believed, had done what bullets and bombs could not. It had pulled Mackay from the present into an ageless purgatory, a cursed echo of battles long past, a timeless battlefield where the dead never rest. Whispers of the Windwalkers. In the windswept forests of North America, the Windwalkers of the northern tribes once practiced archery, not only as an art of survival, but as a bridge to the spiritual world. There exists a haunting legend of their wind arrows, crafted by hand and adorned with ancestral symbols, their every flight a message to the beyond. On nights when the earth grew quiet and the trees whispered with a hushed urgency, the Windwalkers would gather and release these arrows into the gathering dark, their paths crossing the veil to the spirit world. But this was no idle ritual. It was said that each arrow carried a fraction of the archer's spirit, a piece of their essence sent forth to commune with the dead. An arrow that did not return within 3 days was a foreboding omen. It meant that the archer's spirit had been claimed by the very ancestor to whom it had been sent. Some arrows would reappear years later in the places where the archer had met their death. These arrows, tinged with death's quiet breath, became spectral messengers of doom, tracing the lineage of fate and heralding the inevitable. In archery, as in life, there exists no shot without consequence, each arrow an extension of the self, bound to the winds of fate and to the land of the dead, the wraithwood of the Black Death. In the pestilential shadows of 14th century Europe, as towns withered and cemeteries bloated with the dead, a dark tale slithered from the corners of despair, a legend born not of heroes or saints but of rot and ruin. They called it the plague bow, a weapon tainted by death's very breath, carved by hands riddled with the malady that tore families asunder and left souls flitting like ash across the wind. The bowyer who crafted it was a man undone by the Black Death, a labourer of wood and sinew whose final breath shuddered over the incomplete curve of his cursed masterpiece. Upon his death, the bow was lowered with him into the rancid earth, yet it did not rest long there. A grave robber, greedy, leering, unearthed it, his mind alight with visions of silver, his hands twitching with fevered hunger. But this was no simple loot. With it he carried death. The bow's surface, slick and sallow, bore the plague's cruel touch, an unseen but certain poison. The thief, with eyes rolled back and mouth foaming, met his doom soon after, the bow now slick with the sweat of his terror. Yet, in the cruel irony of fate, The weapon found new owners, each of whom would witness its dreadful accuracy, as though it could divine the frailty of life in its target. Those who dared draw its string would sometimes feel the spectral pull of sickness in their veins, a hollow cough echoing behind them as they released each shot. The bow, they say, whispered a dark covenant to its wielder: aim true, but die in turn. Such is the cursed legacy of the plague bow, a weapon that remains hidden, coveted by shadowy collectors who understand its power and yet know its cost. The Forest of the Whispering Arrows. In the dense spectral heart of Romania lies a wood heavy with sorrow, the Forest of the Whispering Arrows, where the past breathes still, haunting each tree and leaf. Long ago, in the 16th century, an entire battalion of archers vanished within its depths, ambushed and silenced by Ottoman forces. Their bows ceased to sing, their arrows fell quiet, but something, some trace of life, lingered beyond death. The locals say that as the last archer's breath faded, their arrows took on a life of their own, dancing through the trees with a spectral hum, as if possessed by an endless compulsion to strike. To this day, brave souls who enter the forest on Halloween report strange sounds, a faint whistle of arrows in the still air, voices murmuring in a language as old as the bones beneath the soil. Some even claim to see shadowed figures flitting between the trees, bows drawn, eyes locked upon a foe that cannot be seen, caught in a spectral reenactment of their last, desperate stand. Pilgrims, archers seeking a connection to the lost warriors, are drawn here, compelled by a sense of kinship, hoping to catch a glimpse of those who fell. But the forest is no memorial. It is a wound, festering with ancient grudges and bound souls. Each who enters risks leaving a piece of themselves behind, for the archers of the Whispering Forest remain, their spirits forever lashed to their weapons, reliving a battle that has no end. The Raven Queen's Pact. Our path veers north to the frigid lands of Nordic legend, where the myth of the Raven Queen's bow prowls through the hearts of warriors and whispers in the dreams of archers. The Raven Queen, an ominous figure draped in shadows, is said to have roamed ancient battlefields, a raven perched upon her shoulder, her gaze as cold as death itself. To her favoured few, the most precise and fearless archers, she granted a gift forged from the bones of a yew tree, the tree of death, its roots entangled with the remains of the fallen, its wood stained by blood. But the gift of the Raven Queen is not without cost. Each arrow shot from her bow severs a thread from the archer's soul, an offering to the queen's insatiable hunger. Over time, the archer would feel a slow hollowing, an unravelling of flesh and spirit, until only an empty shell remained, a shade bound to the Raven Queen, an unwilling soldier in her spectral army. On All Hallows' Eve, one can hear the faint snap of the bowstring, the soft rush of arrows slicing through the midnight mist. Those who hear it too clearly find themselves drawn to the woods, compelled to join the queen's ghastly retinue, their souls scattered upon the cold winds, the price paid for a single moment of deadly precision. The threefold curse of the Archer King. From the frigid north, our tale moves to the dust-laden roads of Persia, where a story of hubris and tragedy unfurls in the legend of Archer King Arash, a hero doomed by his skill. In Iranian myth, Arash the archer was commanded to define the borders of his kingdom by shooting an arrow across the lands, a fateful task that marked his prowess, but would devour him entirely. The arrow, imbued with supernatural force, flew hundreds of miles, carving out the kingdom's edge, yet it exacted a toll that no man could survive. For in its flight, Arash's very life force was drained, his body scattering upon the wind, his essence embedded within the mountain where the arrow finally landed. But the curse of Arash was no mere twist of fate. It was a snare set by an envious sorcerer who could not bear to see such talent unmarred. The curse was layered, a venomous threefold poison. First, Arash's strength would fade with his shot, then his soul would dissolve, and finally he would be condemned to haunt the land his arrow had marked. Those who dared to tread where his arrow landed risked a fate akin to his own, for in that mountainous grave lingered whispers, echoes of Arash's final sigh, a bitter reminder that no skill, however great, is beyond the reach of ruin. The haunting murmur of hollow wood. In the darkened heart of 18th century France, archers began to find strange arrows in their quivers, shafts hollow as a cadaver's ribcage, silent but for a faint whisper carried upon the wind. These hollow shafts, as they became known, were disturbingly light and yet eerily unbreakable, and when the wind blew, they emitted a sound not unlike the moans of those buried far too quickly in shallow graves. When loosed, these shafts seemed to trail behind them a chorus of voices, a guttural murmur of names, places, and sinister fragments of phrases that sounded like desperate confessions. Some archers, enchanted by the allure of the voices, tried to decipher them, believing they might reveal some secret or untold wisdom. Yet those who wielded the hollow shafts found themselves haunted, plagued by nights of broken sleep, waking drenched in the cold sweat of terror, dreaming of dark forests filled with abandoned corpses and fields smothered in fog. The hollow shafts became relics of fear, tokens of death's dominion, and few dared to keep them near. In time the shafts were burned or buried, but some remain hidden away, lingering in the possession of those who cannot bear to part with the unknown. These arrows serve as grim reminders, mementos of the grim transaction that all archers share with their weapons, an unholy pact between the living and the dead, a blood debt that not even time can erase. The vengeance of the Black Forest. In the dense and shadowed heart of the Black Forest in the Holy Roman Empire, there exists a legend, dark and thick as the forest itself. Known as der Schweigsame Bogen, or the Silent Bow, this spectral weapon is a relic of both honor and betrayal. It is said to have belonged to a knight-turned-outlaw, Albrecht Vogt Damathal, once sworn to his emperor but ultimately betrayed by the very hands that clasped his in comradeship. Albrecht was a formidable archer whose skill was unrivaled. They whispered that he could strike the eye of a raven at dusk from 100 paces. But when the Empire's court grew weary of his pride and sought to bring him low, he found himself stripped of title and land, left to wander the forsaken depths of the Black Forest, where the moss smothered every step, and the trees seemed to close in like the walls of a cell. In exile, Albrecht honed his skills with a darkness he had never known, swearing vengeance upon those who had wronged him. He crafted a bow from the Black Forest's heart, from a twisted tree whose roots wrapped around the bones of some ancient, unmarked grave. This bow, silent as a graveyard breath, allowed him to continue his hunt. He used it to stalk those who had betrayed him, picking them off one by one until the forest grew heavy with his grim satisfaction. But it was not long before Albrecht's vengeance consumed him whole. His once noble quest grew twisted, and he began to hunt for the pure thrill of it, for the satisfaction of seeing life drain under his silent arrow's flight. Then, one fateful night, Albrecht disappeared into the depths of the Black Forest, his bow vanishing with him. Yet locals swear that the bow remains, wielded by his restless shade, a figure that appears to those who trespass on these dark grounds with impure intentions. Those who wander near the heart of the forest on All Hallows' Eve speak of a silence so thick it chokes the breath, punctuated only by the faint terrible sound of an arrow slicing the air. And should you see the shadow of Albrecht Vogt Damathal with eyes burning from the darkness, you must flee, for his bow never misses, and his spirit remains tethered to the vengeance that left him lost and bound in those accursed woods. The Spectre of Morteuil. In the windswept plains outside Morteuil, in the heart of France, there lies a tale as bitter and sombre as the winter fog that blankets the countryside. During the chaotic reign of Charles VI, known as the Mad, there lived a chevalier, a master archer named Etienne de Morteuil, famed for his loyalty and his precision. Known as the Arrow of the King, Etienne was called upon not only for battle, but for darker deeds, acts of quiet execution for those Charles deemed enemies of the crown. His reputation grew, and as he did the king's bidding, whispers swirled about the bow he wielded, that it was a conduit of the chevalier's own twisted spirit, soaked in the blood of the innocents whose lives he took without question or remorse. But as Charles's madness deepened, so did the brutality of his demands. Etienne found himself drowning in the weight of his deeds, his conscience gnawing at him like a rabid beast. In the darkest hours of one night, after an execution that made even the chevalier himself feel hollow and scared, he turned his dagger upon himself. It seemed, though, that death did not come so readily. Having dealt a seemingly life-shattering blow, hoping to end his tormented existence, instead of dying he simply vanished, leaving behind only a bloody dagger and a bow lying on the barren ground. They say that the bow remained in Morteuil, hidden within the hollow walls of a crumbling chapel on the outskirts of the town. It is said to emerge only once a year on Halloween, to hunt those who wander the grounds with secrets black as their hearts. It is believed that Etienne's tortured soul haunts the weapon, his spirit bound in eternal damnation, compelled to seek out those who, like him, harbour the sins of the guilty. Local superstition claims that if you hear the taut whisper of a bowstring in the midnight mist, you are marked by the spectre of Etienne de Morteuil, and there is no escape, for the Chevalier's arrow never misses its mark. The Curse of the Drowning Pit. In the marshy depths of medieval Poland, near the village of Slovice, there stretches a forsaken bog known to locals as Topielisko, Drowning Pit, a place avoided by even the boldest souls. In the 14th century, a brutal knight named Władysław Straszny made his home near this haunted swamp. Władysław, a feared warrior, was known not only for his mastery of the bow, but for the cruelty with which he wielded it. He was notorious for exacting revenge upon those who opposed him, leaving fields littered with bodies, each pierced by arrows feathered with blackened fletching, a harbinger of the evil that clung to him like smoke. But Władysław's reign of terror took an ominous turn one winter's night, when he pursued a fleeing enemy into the very heart of the drowning pit. As the legend goes, the fugitive escaped by some dark miracle, but Władysław became lost in the mists, his mind overcome with fury as he struggled through the thick, oozing mud. Cursing and screaming into the silence, he found himself encircled by the silent bog, with only the cawing of ravens and the strange echoes of his own voice as company. In his frenzy he loosed his final arrow into the darkness, and with it he sealed his own fate. Days later, villagers discovered only his blood-stained bow lying in the muck, its wood warped and twisted. From that day forward, the Topielisko has been a place of strange happenings, of whispers that speak of vengeance and shadowy figures that flit just beyond the eye's reach. Those who wander too close to the bog on dark autumn nights claim to hear the creak of a bowstring and see an arrow that appears from nowhere, piercing the mud just inches from their feet. It is said that on Halloween, Władysław's ghostly form emerges, his twisted bow in hand, his eyes blazing with the madness of his final night. Legends warn that if one meets his gaze, they are doomed to be hunted eternally, their souls dragged down into the drowning pit to suffer as he does, forever lost, forever cursed, in the shadow of the marsh. The blood oath of the Crimson Countess. In the mist-veiled hills of medieval Hungary, near a crumbling fortress on the outskirts of Szadvar, tales of the Vörös Grofno, the Crimson Countess, strike terror into the hearts of villagers even to this day. The Countess, Erzsébet Lovás, was a noble woman reputed for her beauty, her ruthless cunning, and her mastery of the bow. But her fair appearance was but a mask. Erzsébet was infamous for her merciless nature, and for years she hunted her enemies and supposed traitors without a shred of remorse. Her arrows flew silent and swift, ending lives with a chilling accuracy, and her victims would be found in the morning mist, each with a crimson-stained arrow buried in their chest, an eerie mark of her disdain. But Erzsébet's cruelty reached a peak when she turned her vengeance upon her own subjects, accusing them of treachery and witchcraft. The forest near her castle became her personal hunting ground, and the villagers dared not even tread close to the trees, lest they catch the dreaded sight of the Crimson Countess, her bow at the ready, her lips curved in a cold smile. Finally, in desperation, her subjects plotted against her. They lured her into the depths of the woods under the guise of a midnight hunt, only to abandon her there, leaving her to the spirits and shadows of her own making. It was there that Erzsébet met her end, lost in a maze of trees and her own fury, her last arrow released into the darkness just as she was claimed by death. Yet death, it seems, was no release for the Crimson Countess. To this day, those brave or foolish enough to venture near Szadvar's cursed forest report, seeing a shadowy figure, a pale, elegant form moving with dreadful grace, her bow raised. On Halloween night, it is said, her ghost emerges to hunt once more, seeking retribution on all who dare set foot on her haunted grounds. Her blood-stained arrows appear like dark streaks across the night, and those marked by her shot are doomed to suffer unspeakable misfortunes, their souls bound in service to the Crimson Countess's spectral vengeance, her reign of terror stretching beyond even death itself. The ghostly archer of the Rock of Dunamase, in the windswept county of Ypres, Atop the cragged rock of Dunamaise sits the haunting ruin of a once great fortress. It was here, amid Ireland's dark and blood-soaked 12th century, that a figure emerged to terrorize the night, a ghostly archer whose legend remains tied to the infamous Norman warlord, Richard de Clare, better known as Strongbow. Strongbow's conquest of Ireland was relentless, his army leaving behind a path of ruin and despair as he seized lands and claimed titles, his banner fluttering over territories that had belonged to the Irish for centuries. The Rock of Dunamaise became one of his conquests, fortified as a stronghold of Norman rule, but with his victory came the whispers of rebellion and the curse of a wrathful spirit. According to the tale, a young Irish archer, Doncha Macgiola Fadraig, once fiercely loyal to the kings of Laois, fell at Dunamaise while defending his homeland. They say he fought to the last arrow, his dying breath spent cursing Strongbow and his men, swearing to haunt the stone where he fell until the Normans were driven from Ireland. Yet in a brutal twist, Strongbow's men denied him the honour of a proper burial, instead casting his body to the ravens and allowing the earth to claim his bones in shadow. Soon after, the ghostly figure of an archer began to haunt the Rock of Dunamaise, an ethereal spectre clad in worn, blood-stained armour, with a broken bow gripped in his bony hands. On stormy nights his figure would appear along the ramparts, pale and hollow-eyed, bow drawn, his target invisible to mortal eyes. Some say that those caught in his sights are struck by a cold dread, as though the spectral arrow penetrates their very soul. The locals of Laois claim that on Halloween the cursed archer roams Dunamaise's ruined battlements, still guarding his homeland, waiting for Strongbow's blood to repay the stain on his honour. Legends warn that those who trespass may find a phantom arrow embedded in the soil beside them, a grim reminder that Doncha's vigil remains unbroken, his oath echoing through centuries, binding him to the Rock of Dunamaise in restless rage. The Wraith of the Mourne Mountains. In the shadowy Mourne Mountains of Northern Ireland, shrouded in mist and steeped in folklore, lies the story of the phantom archer of Slieve Donard, a tale as cold and foreboding as the mountain air. This archer, known as Caolan Mac Ant Saer, was a rebel fighter during the late 16th century, a time when the Gaelic lords clashed with English forces in a brutal struggle for sovereignty. Caolan was famed for his deadly skill with the longbow, his arrows finding their mark with a supernatural precision that made him both a hero and a legend among the local clans. But his luck ran out when he was betrayed by a clansman in exchange for a heavy purse of silver. Captured by English soldiers, Caolan was dragged to Slieve Donard, bound and bleeding, to be executed as a warning to other rebels. But before the killing blow fell, Caolan cursed the mountain and swore that his spirit would never rest, that he would haunt the slopes until every traitor and foreign invader felt the sting of his arrows. With a fierce scream, he was struck down, his body left for the ravens and his bow snapped in two, cast aside like so much refuse. It wasn't long before strange sightings were reported on the mountain trails. Shepherds and travellers alike spoke of an eerie figure in tattered leather, with a twisted bow clutched in skeletal hands, appearing when the fog was thickest, his eyes burning with hatred. The phantom archer would draw his bow, releasing arrows that seemed to dissolve into the mist, yet left an icy chill in their wake, as if marking his presence. It is said that on Halloween night, Caolan Mac Ant Saer emerges in full fury, his arrows aimed at those he deems treacherous, leaving marks that only he can see. Local superstition holds that if you feel an inexplicable chill on the mountain, you've been marked by Caolan's spirit, and are cursed to be haunted by misfortune. Those who see him are said to be pursued by his vengeful spirit, bound to feel his fury in the depths of night, and some have even claimed to find phantom arrows embedded in their doors, symbols of Caolan's eternal wrath. For the phantom archer of Slieve Donard, the war never ended. His broken bow remains drawn, his fury unspent, his spirit locked forever in the misty mountains, a cruel reminder of betrayal and rebellion unquieted by death. As the final shadows draw long and night blankets the tales we have gathered, we leave these haunted paths and spectral echoes with reverence and a chill that clings to the heart. The archer's craft, steeped in ancient ritual and bound to realms beyond our own, has shown itself as more than mere skill. It is a communion with fate, a dance with forces that lie veiled, awaiting only the quiet whistle of an arrow to stir them from their silence, Each story is a reminder that, in the world of the archer, every pull of the string calls to the unknown, every release unfurls the threads of destiny. So, let us tread carefully, for these haunted weapons, these lost souls in shadowed woods, remain vigilant, guarding secrets of ages past, poised between realms of the living and the dead. And on the dark nights, when the air grows cold and the veil thins, remember, some shots once loosed never truly find their end.